Dune Prophecy, it's had a very tumultuous time getting produced, which I guess shouldn't surprise any Dune fans, really. I feel like every Dune production has seen its share of setbacks, but this production in particular has experienced multiple behind-the-scenes shakeups. They actually filmed a pilot, and then from that, completely changed direction. I think before it wasn't really tied so much to Denis Villeneuve's two-film adaptation, and I think they wanted to pivot more towards connecting it to those films. So we definitely see that the style and the atmosphere is very similar to Villeneuve's style, especially with the Bene Gesserit costumes and with the royal house as well, similar to House Atreides uniforms that we've seen in the films. And whether or not people liked that idea, we'll have to see how it goes out. I think people wanted something that looked different because this is actually set 10,000 years before the events of Dune. And I think people were kind of taken aback initially by, well, shouldn't it look different? And I understand that. And I feel the same way too. I felt like it should have had some sort of difference there, set its own unique tone to separate the eras of time. When it comes to the marketing campaign for Dune Prophecy, there's been like very little information, especially now when the show's about to premiere in November. We don't really know any significant details other than the initial plot line, which was they're following two Harkonnen sisters as they establish the fabled sect known as the Bene Gesserit. And it's set 10,000 years before Paul Atreides arrives. And that was it. That's the only information that we've had for so long. And ever since then, it was just stills from the show or different character promotion images. And I've been really wanting significant details about these characters. There's several original characters. And when you compare it to other marketing campaigns for other shows like The Penguin, I feel like there was more of a promotion there as far as like, what's the deal with the show? And here's the characters that are in it and what's their drive, what's their motivation. And I was feeling like we weren't getting that much when it came to Dune Prophecy. So it made me kind of concerned. But now we finally have 2 months out almost before the show's premiere. We finally have some significant details about the plot and the approach to the series. So this in-depth article is from Entertainment Weekly, and we have like several images from the show in there, but also several comments from the actors and producers. The title of the article is How Dune Prophecy Unfolds the Secret History of the Bene Gesserit. And we have a quote here from the showrunner, "We get to see how it all started." So the article starts saying, Dune is about a lot of things, but the central narrative of Frank Herbert's original sci-fi novel and the two Denis Villeneuve film adaptations revolves around Paul Atreides and his destiny. But there's much more to the universe of Dune than Paul alone, and that's what HBO's new prequel TV series, Dune Prophecy, is going to explore. The primary focus of the series is the Bene Gesserit, the mystical, matriarchal order that will one day manipulate Paul's rise to power from the shadows. But in this new show, set 10,000 years before Dune proper, the Bene Gesserit is still coming into existence. Two women are the driving force behind its rise to prominence, Valia Harkonnen, played by Emily Watson, and Tula Harkonnen, played by Olivia Williams, who are both biological sisters and members of this new sisterhood. So far, it's just what we've known already as far as the basic premise of the show. We follow the two Harkonnen sisters as they establish the Bene Gesserit. The article continues saying, even the most superficial fan of this franchise should be raising an eyebrow at those names, since the Harkonnen family are the main antagonists of the original Dune story. But in this distant past, the Harkonnens do not yet possess their powerful monopoly on the spice of Arrakis. Instead, they are reeling from a recent galactic war whose outcome has branded them as cowards and traitors. So I thought this was interesting because it doesn't even say what the Galactic War was, but this was the Great Revolt, the Butlerian Jihad, the uprising against artificial intelligence, intelligent machines, thinking machines, and computers. This changed the course of humanity's future drastically. And from that, towards the end of those events, was the Battle of Corrin, where an Atreides had one of the Harkonnen ancestors banished for cowardice. They are now branded as cowards and traitors, so this article is alluding to those events. That's also in keeping with what Frank Herbert established. Showrunner Alison Shapker says, we get to see how it all started. When we meet Valia Harkonnen, she is a girl whose family has experienced a tremendous fall from power and has lost its noble status. She dreams of restoring what she feels is rightfully theirs. How she goes from being someone obsessed with rebuilding her noble house to being someone who is dedicated to the sisterhood above all is a big part of the story. It's not a girlhood coming-of-age narrative so much as a woman's rise to power from a Harkonnen perspective. Initially, I was kind of taken aback when she said, when we meet Valia Harkonnen, she is a girl. So obviously the pictures that we've seen of Valia Harkonnen, played by Emily Watson, she is very much a mature woman. So the article will confirm it later too, but there is going to be flashbacks that we can expect. When you incorporate flashbacks, I do feel that there is an art to it. There were a lot of shows, I think, that tended to rely too heavily on flashbacks, and it is kind of jarring. But if it's incorporated into the narrative in an organic way, if it makes sense, if we're going back to see an event that will then connect to what's happening in the future, there's definitely a way to do it well. It just has to justify its existence. You have to justify the purpose of why we're going back to the past, and the event has to connect with what's going on in the future events. We'll see how that goes. So the article continues. So instead of a young boy trying to become a man, Dune Prophecy centers around two middle-aged women. That doesn't immediately sound interesting when you put it like that. If you're trying to sell the show, I wouldn't go it by that way. Instead of a coming-of-age story, we're just following two middle-aged women. That's not how I would advertise the show. Both Williams and Watson really enjoyed getting to delve into the show's complex sci-fi storytelling. Williams and Watson didn't have to worry about sweating their way through the desert sets that stand in for Arrakis and Villeneuve's movies, which Austin Butler described as a microwave. After all, this show is about how the universe is bigger than just Arrakis, and the Bene Gesserit's base of operations is elsewhere. And that's what I think audiences, or maybe new fans and Dune fans alike, they're wanting to see more of the Dune universe. Williams goes on to comment, everyone I know who's seen the movies kept asking me, oh wow, were you in these incredibly hot countries? I was like, no, our planet is damp and wet. There was a guy with a water tank on and he'd pump it and spray everything with water. I basically developed webbed feet by the end of filming this show, but the sets were breathtaking. In particular, the central hall of the Bene Gesserit convent was a modern church built in the 70s that had been abandoned in this Hungarian woodland. When you walked onto that set, it took your breath away. And that's where they also filmed for the two-part adaptation. So they weren't filming in Jordan, but yes, they were filming in the same areas in Hungary for this show as well as the films. So now we're getting into the approach and the source material that this show is based on. It continues, Herbert wrote 5 Dune sequel novels, the first of which, Dune Messiah, is definitely on Villeneuve's radar. But following his death in 1986, his son Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson have co-written a whole multitude of prequel novels that detail the history of this fictional universe. Their book, Sisterhood of Dune, was the starting point for Dune Prophecy, but Shapker tells EW that she and her team also took a creative approach to adaptation. Shapker says, I really believe that we found the best of both worlds when it comes to adaptation. Sisterhood of Dune was our seminal text that we were working with and drawing inspiration from. Our story is tethered to the events in that book, but we are also telling a story that takes place 30 years after the events of the book. So we have both the book to draw from, but we also have room to develop our characters and tell the story of Valia Harkonnen across multiple timelines. For the past timeline, they are taking inspiration from the Sisterhood of Dune novel, but also charting a new path forward for those characters for the present and future timelines. So it'll be kind of both, an adaptation, but also charting new ground that hasn't been covered before. I think that's kind of interesting, and I think that's probably the direction to go if you're going to do something like this. I do wonder how they're going to juggle the multiple timelines. So we're going to get a narrative that will cover several different timelines connecting to the Harkonnen sisters. This could possibly get messy. I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle this in a way that feels organic. It can be a bit jarring, I guess, if we're jumping around. And with the multiple timelines, I'm really curious as to what visions of the future are we going to see? Is this going to be tied to the events of Dune itself, that far into the future for them? They're not going to see how the events unfold ultimately when it comes to Paul Atreides, because that was something they never prepared for, was the Kwisatz Haderach coming a generation earlier and throwing off all of their plans. So that was something they didn't plan for, and they wouldn't have seen that. So I'm curious as to what are they going to see in the future that will keep their plans along a timeline of their choosing? What are they going to see to kind of move them forward in their plans for humanity's destiny? The article continues, yes, you heard that right. Dune Prophecy's narrative is split into different time periods, and across all those years, its characters are always cognizant of the past, present, and, as hinted by the title, the future. The Bene Gesserit members, who are elevated to the rank of Reverend Mother, have the unique ability to access the memories of all Reverend Mothers who came before. And that's interesting too, because in the Sisterhood of Dune, there was one Reverend Mother that just happened, and they're trying to develop more. So it was just groundbreaking for them as far as their ancestral memory goes. So the showrunner, Alison Shapiro, continues saying, a hallmark of Dune is that time is not just linear. Some of them are actively communicating with their female ancestors at any given time. There are hidden histories and secrets to be discovered in the past that very much influenced the present as our characters designed the future. We wanted to create a series that allowed history to be alive, and that meant spending much of our time in the past. Again, this is very much really just focusing on the Bene Gesserit and their plans for humanity. So I wonder, though, how they're going to incorporate these other elements. The article continues saying there are some constants throughout time. This story also has an emperor, played by Mark Strong, and an Atreides swordmaster, played by Chris Mason, but also new players like the mysterious Desmond Hart, played by Travis Fimmel. In other words, this isn't your typical prequel. Past, present, and future will all intersect and collide when Dune Prophecy premieres this November on HBO.